What if the man you judged was the very reason someone you love is still alive? He didn't come with a uniform, no camera crew, no medals on his chest, just a missing arm, a quiet presence, and a truth the world almost ignored. Today, you're about to witness the story of a forgotten hero, a decorated black veteran mocked, doubted, stopped at the gates of his own honor ceremony. But when a powerful general stepped forward, everything changed. What happened next will not only leave you speechless, it will change the way you see people, forever. Don't scroll, don't skip. This is more than just a story, it's a wake-up call. It's a truth millions need to hear. And once you hear it, you won't forget his name, not this time. He stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in the pockets of a worn-out jacket. The left sleeve hung empty, just fabric, no arm. His stance was calm, but his eyes told another story. Tired, wary, like he'd seen too much and said too little. Around him, people whispered. They didn't recognize him, not as a hero, not as a veteran, not even as someone who belonged there. They saw a black man, alone, disabled, unimpressive, invisible. He shifted his weight. A silver invitation poked from his jacket, the kind reserved for the highest level of honorees. But no one cared. Not the guests, not the press, and definitely not the uniformed officer slowly making his way over. "Hey," the officer said, eyes narrowing. "You lost, sir?" The man stayed still. "No," he answered softly. "I'm here for the ceremony." The officer looked him up and down, then down again at the empty sleeve, at the scar running along his jaw, at the skin color he wouldn't say out loud but was clearly thinking about. The cop smirked. "Sure you are." He waved a hand toward the entrance. "This is for decorated veterans only, not for people trying to get a free lunch." A few heads turned, some laughed, others just looked away. The man didn't flinch, didn't protest. He pulled out the invite, held it steady. The officer took it, flipped it over, scanned it, still skeptical. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. The veteran paused. "It was sent to me." "Yeah? You photoshopped this at a library or something?" He laughed. No one else did. Still, the man remained calm, didn't raise his voice, didn't demand respect. He just stood there, one-armed, silent, waiting. A woman in a blue blazer stepped up next to the officer. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. "Not really," the cop said. "Just someone pretending to be something he's not." That line stung. Not because it was harsh, but because it was lazy. The kind of insult thrown by people who never had to prove anything in their lives. The kind of people who'd never seen blood dry on sand. The kind of people who'd never carried a brother out of gunfire. Still, he said nothing, just waited. But the ceremony had already started. Inside, names were being read. Veterans from wars old and new were being called to the stage, one by one, applauded, photographed, remembered. The veteran glanced at the doors. He should have been in there by now. He should have been sitting with the others, but instead he was standing outside, on the sidewalk, under scrutiny, under suspicion, under judgment. The officer radioed in, asked someone to double-check the name, asked if this guy was on the list, as if a forged invite would be handed out in a military event. Minutes passed. People kept walking in. Someone brushed past him and muttered under their breath, "Should have worn a suit if you wanted to look important." He looked down. His boots were scuffed, his jeans faded, his jacket clearly old military issue. Not polished, not showy, just real. That was the point. He didn't dress to impress. He dressed for who he was. A soldier, a survivor. But nobody saw that. Not yet. And then, from the far edge of the parking lot, a tall man in a decorated uniform began to walk toward the scene, shoulders square, eyes focused. Dozens noticed him right away. A 4-star general. He wasn't supposed to be there yet, but he saw the commotion, saw the officer, saw the veteran, and stopped mid-stride. His eyes locked onto the man being mocked, and something in his face changed. Recognition, shock. Then something deeper. Respect. He began to move faster. Toward them. Toward the officer. Toward the man they laughed at. No one knew yet. But everything was about to change. This wasn't just another vet. He was the reason that General was still breathing. But in that moment, he was just the guy with one arm standing outside, being treated like nothing. And the world was watching, without knowing what they were about to see. Long before the empty sleeve, before the stairs, before the ceremony, he wasn't allowed to enter. He was something else entirely. He was a ghost. That's what they called him. Not out of fear, out of awe. He moved like smoke in the dead of night. Struck. Like thunder in silence. Disappeared before his target hit the ground. His real name was classified in most reports. But his code name? Shadow Viper. He wasn't born with it. He earned it, operation after operation, mission after mission, enemy after enemy who never saw it coming. His file, redacted. His photo, blurred out or missing entirely. You wouldn't find him in group shots. He wasn't the one posing with medals. He was the one taking the photo and then vanishing. Most didn't know where he was deployed, but the few who did never forgot. Iraq, Mosul insurgents had set a trap. A convoy was ambushed, fire from rooftops, improvised explosives, screaming, chaos. And in the middle of it, one man ran into the storm, not away from it. He didn't wait for orders, didn't call for backup. He was the backup. His rifle, custom-built, silencer attached, one shot, one kill. And that day he saved 6 lives, including one belonging to a very important man, a colonel back then, later to become a general. But at the time, he was bleeding out behind a flipped Humvee, pinned, down, losing consciousness. Bullets ricocheted off metal like hail, and then out of nowhere, a single pop. A window shattered, another pop. Then silence. Then a hand, pulling him from the wreckage, dragging him, shielding him. A voice in the chaos. You're gonna live, sir, but only if you shut up and hold on. He blacked out after that, woke up in Germany, alive, grateful, confused. They told him someone saved him, but the name wasn't on any record. All he got was a whisper from another soldier. It was Shadow Viper. That was the first time the general heard the name, and the last time he ever forgot it, because Shadow Viper didn't stay for thanks. He never did. He didn't care about promotions, didn't care about rank. He just cared about the mission. That's who he was. That's who he'd always been, even before the military. Raised by his grandmother in South Carolina. Taught respect, discipline, and never to talk big about yourself. If you're good, she used to say, people will talk about you. If you're great, they'll whisper your name like a legend. And legend he became. Until one final mission, the one that ended everything, a compound raid. In the dark, too many hostiles, too little intel. He took the shot that saved his team. But the explosion that followed took his arm, his career, and nearly all his life. He was shipped home. No ceremony, no parade, just silence. He didn't complain, didn't post online, didn't even tell his neighbors. He just tried to disappear again. But heroes don't fade easily. Someone noticed, someone remembered, and that's why years later, an official invitation showed up in his mailbox, addressed to him, by name, the real one, signed by a general, the same man whose life he saved. A seat was reserved at the National Veterans Honor Ceremony. A moment, finally, to recognize the ghost, who never asked for the spotlight, so he came, not in uniform, not in polished boots, but as himself, as the man behind the legend. He didn't come to impress. He came because someone remembered, because finally, someone knew the truth. And even though he stood outside that building now, mocked, dismissed, judged, there was a storm rising inside, not of anger, but of truth. and it was about to break through those walls. Because Shadow Viper was never meant to be seen, but once seen, he could never be forgotten. The ceremony had already begun. Inside, names were being called. Applause echoed from the grand hall. Camera shutters clicked. Uniforms gleamed under stage lights. But outside, just feet from the entrance, the man they called Shadow Viper was still waiting, still being questioned, still not believed. The officer leaned in, hands on his hips. "You got a name, sir?" The veteran nodded, gave it calmly. No attitude, no arrogance. The cop raised an eyebrow. "I don't see you on the list." He looked again at the invitation, still skeptical, still certain he was being played. "This is a federal event. You lie about something like this? That's a felony." The veteran's expression didn't change. He just said, "I'm not lying." The officer scoffed. "Funny, 'cause nothing about you says decorated war hero." Another pause, another stab. More people were gathering near the doors now. Some looked on in confusion, some in curiosity. Others with that quiet, familiar judgment. Whispers started. "Who is he? Why's that guy being stopped?" "I think he tried to sneak in." A security agent stepped closer, tapped on a tablet, started searching the database. The officer folded his arms, said loudly, "This is why we double-check. Can't be too careful." The veteran stood still, didn't flinch, didn't explain himself, didn't beg. He just waited. A woman in a black dress walked past him, clutched her purse tighter, avoided eye contact. He noticed, didn't react, didn't need to. He'd seen that look 1,000 times before, in airports and stores, now even here, at a ceremony meant to honor people like him. "Sir," the officer said again, louder this time, "if you don't leave voluntarily, I will have to escort you." The veteran met his eyes. "There's no need for that." His voice was calm, even respectful. But there was steel under it, the kind of voice that said, "I've faced worse than this, and I'm still standing." A few feet away, a young boy tugged on his dad's sleeve. "Why are they yelling at that man, Daddy?" Dad shifted uncomfortably. Didn't answer, didn't want to. And the veteran? He heard it all, but stayed still. He had faced enemies with rocket launchers. He'd walked through minefields under the cover of night. A few judgmental stares, a few cruel words. They didn't shake him. But deep down, it hurt. Not because they didn't know who he was, but because they didn't care. The security agent finally looked up from the tablet, confused. "I don't see him listed." The officer smirked. "I told you," turned back to the veteran. "You're not supposed to be here." He said it slow, deliberate, loud enough for everyone to hear. The veteran opened his mouth, about to speak, but something stopped him. Not fear, not weakness, but something else. Movement from the crowd, from the back. Someone was approaching, not in a rush, not in panic, but with purpose. Heavy boots on concrete, uniform gleaming, ribbons, stars and medals on his chest. A man everyone recognized instantly. A 4-star general. People stood straighter. Some saluted instinctively. Even the officer froze. The general didn't slow down, didn't look at anyone but him. The man with the empty sleeve. The man they mocked. The veteran didn't move, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition. The general stepped in front of the officer. Voice firm. "Is there a problem here?" The officer straightened up. "Sir, this individual." The general cut him off. "You're speaking about Staff Sergeant." He paused, then said the name, his real name, his rank, the one the officer never asked for, the one the crowd never imagined belonged to him. The air shifted. You could feel it, like a cold wind before thunder. The general turned to the veteran, his voice gentler now, almost reverent. "I thought you weren't coming." The veteran shrugged. "I wasn't sure I should." "You should," the general said, quietly, more than anyone. People stared, mouths parted. Silence fell. Even the officer stepped back, uncertain now. The general turned to the crowd and said something no one expected. "This man is not just a veteran. He's the reason I'm standing here today." And just like that, the world around them began to change. The crowd leaned in, The cameras turned, the whispers stopped, because now they were finally seeing him. Not as a one-armed man, not as a stranger, but as something far greater. A forgotten warrior, a living legend, and the man who was told he wasn't supposed to be here was exactly where he needed to be. Inside the hall, the lights dimmed. A trumpet began to play. The crowd settled. The ceremony had officially started. Rows of veterans sat proudly in their uniforms. Families clutched tissues. Camera crews positioned their lenses. A large screen displayed the title, National Ceremony for Heroic Service. Applause erupted as the first name was called. Each name echoed through the auditorium, each followed by cheers, each followed by medals. But one chair, third row, front center, remained empty, reserved, untouched. Small plaque rested on the seat. It read, Staff Sergeant, Honored Guest. But Staff Sergeant wasn't there. He was still outside, still standing, still being questioned, still being judged. A ceremony designed to celebrate heroes had just begun, by ignoring one. Inside, the announcer paused. Next, he said into the Yeti, Microphone. Staff Sergeant. He looked up, brows furrowed. The screen behind him lit up with the veteran's name, but no one came forward. A few heads turned, eyes scanned the room. Still nothing. A voice from the crowd whispered, Maybe he didn't show. Another muttered, Maybe he didn't belong in the first place. The announcer hesitated, then continued down the list. Inside the hall, the celebration rolled on, but outside, the storm had only just begun. The general stared hard at the officer, who had tried to remove the veteran, his jaw tight, his tone clipped. You owe this man an apology. The officer stammered. I didn't know. You didn't ask, the general snapped. You assumed. The crowd outside had grown. Phones were out. Recording, streaming, documenting every second. But the veteran? He said nothing. Didn't gloat, didn't demand retribution. He just waited. Same posture, same silence, same dignity. Because even after all that, he wasn't angry, he was disappointed. Disappointed in a world that promised honor, but forgot respect. Inside the hall, the general's aide rushed in, whispered into the announcer's ear. The man on stage nodded slowly, stepped back to the microphone. We have an urgent change to today's order, he announced. The next guest will be personally escorted. Murmurs rippled through the room. Back outside, the general turned, faced the veteran, said, Come with me. But the veteran hesitated, looked at the officer, looked at the crowd, looked at the doors that were closed to him just moments ago. He took a slow breath, then nodded. The general walked beside him. Not ahead, not behind, beside, step for step. Every eye in the crowd followed them. The man who had once disappeared into the shadows was now walking straight into the light. The doors opened, not pushed, not pulled, held wide by two junior officers who now stood at attention. Inside, the music paused, the chatter stopped, all turned to look, and in walked a man in a faded jacket, scuffed boots, an empty sleeve, and more bravery in his silence than most men show in a lifetime. People stood, not because they were told, because they felt it, because they knew. This man wasn't just a guest, he was the moment everyone would remember. The general spoke into the announcer's mic, loud, clear. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Staff Sergeant. He said the name again, this time with weight, with reverence. The crowd erupted. Applause thundered. Some shouted, "Thank you." Others wiped their eyes. A few saluted. The veteran said nothing, just nodded once. Then, slowly took his seat. The seat that waited for him. The one that was always his. But the silence in his eyes, that told a story louder than words. Of years being invisible. Of sacrifices unnoticed. Of a country still learning what respect really means. And as the next names were read, as the ceremony continued, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. They almost let their greatest hero stand alone, while they clapped for others but not anymore, because now the whole world was watching, and what they saw was unforgettable. The room was still buzzing. People were whispering, pointing, wondering. Who was this man? What made him so important? Why did the general walk him in personally? The announcer had moved on. More names were called, more medals awarded. But the attention kept drifting back to the man in the third row, the one with the empty sleeve, the one who didn't clap, didn't smile, didn't shift in his seat. He just sat there, quiet, composed, as if he'd seen it all before. And then, the general stood up, again. But this time, he walked to the stage, not as a scheduled speaker, not as part of the program, but as a man with something heavy on his chest, something he needed to say. The audience grew quiet. He took the microphone, cleared. His throat looked directly at the crowd, then back to the third row and said, "You don't know me because of my stars. You know me because I lived long enough to earn them." He paused. "My name is General Lawrence Keating, and today I want to tell you about a man." He looked down for a moment, then lifted his gaze again. 16 years ago in Mosul, Iraq, I was supposed to die. His voice shook slightly. There was a trap, an ambush. Everything went wrong. I was bleeding alone, certain it was the end. But then, one shot, then another, then silence. And from the smoke, he came. He turned to point to that man, sitting right there. The audience gasped. Cameras turned. Every phone was recording now. He dragged me to safety with one arm and covered me with his own body. Not because he had to, because he chose to. He took a breath, steadier now. I never knew his name that day. He disappeared before I could say thank you, before I could shake his hand, before I could tell him. He paused again, then looked straight at the veteran. "You saved my life. You gave me years I never would have had. My wife, my grandchildren, my career, all of it. Because of you." His voice cracked. "Sir." He stepped away from the podium, walked off the stage, down the aisle. The room was silent. No music, no clapping, just quiet breathing. He reached the veteran, stood in front of him, and said, clear as day, "Sir, that man saved my life." Then he did something no one expected. He saluted. Not just a quick nod, a full salute. Precise, sharp, earned. And the veteran? He stood up, slowly, returned the salute. Simple, solid, unshaken. And for the first time, he spoke into the microphone. Just 5 words. "I was just doing my job." The room erupted. Applause, cheers, tears. It wasn't just respect, it was recognition, redemption. A wave of it crashed through that hall. The general wasn't finished. He turned back to the stage, held up a small black box. This medal wasn't part of the ceremony. It wasn't approved by a committee. It wasn't chosen by a panel. It's mine. And I'm giving it to the man who earned it more than I ever did. He opened it. Inside, gleaming in the light, the Legion of Valor. A personal medal, rare, reserved. The general pinned it to the veteran's jacket, not below the heart, over it, because that's where it belonged. More applause, more emotion. Even the officer who'd questioned him earlier, he stood in the back, eyes down. No smirk now, no ego, just shame. The general looked at the crowd one last time. If you ever wonder what a hero looks like, he pointed again. There he is. The lights in the hall seemed brighter, the air warmer, and the truth unforgettable. He was never looking for praise, never asked for honor, but today it found him anyway. Because truth always does, especially when whispered long enough, it becomes a roar. The room didn't calm down right away. The applause lingered, not polite, not rehearsed, but real. Raw, a standing ovation that didn't end when the cameras turned off. It ended when the veteran raised his hand, just slightly, a signal. Enough, and just like that, the room quieted again. He sat down slowly. The medal on his chest caught the light. It wasn't heavy, but it meant everything. not because it sparkled, but because of who gave it to him. Not a politician, not a journalist, but a man who owed him his life. That kind of honor, it can't be bought. It can't be faked. And for once, he wasn't invisible anymore. He was seen, fully, finally. The officer who had stopped him earlier stood frozen at the back of the room. He looked pale, embarrassed, like the weight of everything he'd said was now crashing down on him, and it should, because he hadn't just doubted a hero, he had humiliated one, out loud, in public. But the veteran never looked at him, never acknowledged the insult, because that wasn't his focus. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for something bigger. The announcer stepped back up to the mic, his voice quieter now, softer. "I think we all learned something today." He glanced toward the veteran, toward the empty sleeve, then back at the crowd. Sometimes the greatest warriors don't walk in with drums or flags. They walk in quiet, with scars, with stories, and the courage to carry both. A low murmur of agreement passed through the audience. Then, from the back of the room, a boy, maybe 10 years old, stood up, clutched a small American flag. He walked down the aisle, slowly. No one stopped him. No one asked why. He made his way to the third row, to the veteran, then looked up and said, "Thank you, sir." His voice cracked halfway through. He held out the flag with both hands. The veteran took it, nodded once, then whispered back, "Make the world better than we left it." Simple words, but they hit like a drumbeat in every heart. The moment became a ripple. People leaned forward, moved, changed. Even the media team in the back stopped filming for just a second, because sometimes you just need to feel it. And there it was, a room full of strangers united by one truth. Honor doesn't come from uniforms. It comes from actions, from choices, from sacrifice. And now, finally, the man who had been mocked, questioned, dismissed, had been honored by a general, by a room of veterans, by a child who would remember this moment forever. After the ceremony ended, people came up one by one, not to gawk, but to thank. A Navy vet saluted him, a nurse hugged him, a reporter cried. He accepted them all the same way, quietly, with grace, no ego, no bitterness, just presence. Even the officer eventually walked up, hat in, and literally he paused, struggled for words. "Sir, I'm sorry. I misjudged you. I was wrong." The veteran didn't say much, didn't need to. He just looked the man in the eye and said, "Next time, don't look for medals. Look for the man." The officer nodded, choked on a reply, then walked away, changed. Later that night, when the building emptied, the veteran stood at the edge of the parking lot, alone again, but not forgotten. The flag was still in his hand, the medal still on his chest, but more importantly, he carried something else now. A truth, a moment, a recognition that could never be taken back. He hadn't come looking for it, but it found him. Because real honor doesn't need an invitation. It just needs the courage to stand, even when no one is watching, especially then. The building emptied slowly. People lingered longer than usual, as if something sacred had just happened, and no one wanted to be the first to leave it behind. Outside, the wind had picked up. Flags fluttered. The sky had turned that soft color just before twilight, and there he stood at the edge of it all, the man who changed the story. By simply showing up, no fanfare, no entourage, no social media post, just presence. He looked out at the horizon, the flag still in his hand, the medal still on his chest, but his eyes, somewhere far away, maybe back in Mosul, maybe on a dusty road with brothers he'd never see again, or maybe just grateful to finally feel something close to peace. He didn't wait for interviews, didn't stick around for more praise. He just started, walking, same steady steps, same quiet dignity. No need to explain, no need to stay, because that's who he was. That's who he'd always been. Inside, people were still talking, sharing what they'd seen, what they'd felt. Some pulled up old stories, tried to search his name, only to find almost nothing. No LinkedIn, no podcasts, no interviews. He hadn't branded himself a hero. He hadn't asked to go viral. He just was one. And those are the ones who never need to say it out loud. But the internet found him anyway. Clips from the ceremony hit social media within hours. The moment the general saluted him, the child handing over the flag, the quiet nod, it all went viral. Hashtags appeared. The man with one arm, Shadow Viper, real hero people, wanted to know more, but there wasn't much to find, just whispers, just respect. Because the best parts of him were never meant to be broadcast, they were meant to be remembered, by the people who mattered, by the lives he saved, by the ones who served beside him. A former squadmate posted a comment. Simple, powerful. That man carried me through hell once. Never asked for anything. He just told me to breathe. I never stopped. Another one wrote, he took a bullet for a kid he didn't know, then apologized for bleeding too much. Stories poured in, one by one, and they all said the same thing. He didn't just fight. He protected. And now, he was gone again. Like he'd always done. Quiet exits. No headlines, no spotlight, just footprints fading into the pavement. But this time, something was different. This time the world noticed. And maybe for once, it was paying attention to the right kind of hero. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't pose, doesn't chase cameras, just shows up, stands tall, and leaves quietly. But leaves everything changed behind him. The general was asked about him later, that week at a press conference. A journalist asked, why didn't we know his name before? The general paused, smiled slightly, and said, because real warriors don't chase history. They just make it. He walked away after that, just like the man who saved him. Like teacher, like student. Legacy passed without ceremony, but carried in silence. Somewhere, a new plaque was being carved, a seat renamed, a story rewritten. And kids like that little boy with the flag, would grow up knowing that sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear capes or stand on podiums. Sometimes they wear scars and walk away before you even learn their name. But now, we know it and we won't forget, because the man they mocked became the man we all needed. And even when he walked away quietly again, he didn't disappear. He became legend. He didn't stay for the cameras. He didn't wait for applause. He just walked away. Again, but not unnoticed. Not anymore. Because this time, the world saw him. Not just the missing arm, not just the old jacket. They saw the man, the protector, the legend, and maybe the next time we meet someone quiet, scarred, or overlooked, we'll stop, we'll think, we'll remember this story. Because that's what heroes do. They don't just survive the battlefield. They carry the weight of silence when the war comes home. And if this story moved you, share it. Tell someone. Talk about the kind of respect that doesn't come with claps, but with action. Because for every man like him still out there, sitting quietly in the background, there's a world that's finally ready to listen. Subscribe for more real, untold stories. Comment if this changed the way you see a stranger. And above all, never forget, the most powerful people are often the quietest ones in the room.